take this shot because he would probably stuck me with his knife, which it's. I hope it's gonna be 23.7 carat of Australian gold. Most incredible knife maker, and he wanna tell about his engineering process and what he wanna do with his knife. Okay, Frank, go.
Well, years ago, I was in my kitchen, and I was in a bad state of mind, and I could not walk, and I needed an operation that nobody could do. And I used to go, every year I used to go to specialty hospitals to see if they could find out why I was in the pain I was in. And I was in the kitchen one morning, fixing myself a cup of coffee, and there was a meat cleaver on the countertop. I looked at that meat cleaver, and I said, "There's a lot of steel in this meat cleaver. I'm going to take this meat cleaver out to my little shed, which I have in the back of the house, and learn how to make a knife." Well, all winter went by. This was in November, and by March, I made a knife out of this meat cleaver. And I cut the steel up and made a blade, and made the bolts, and made the liners, and I had an old piece of oak wood, and I made the handle out of that. But what made the knife fun to make? It was a switchblade, which is the epitome of a knife. Well, I had so much fun making that knife. I bought a Popular Mechanics magazine, and I looked in the back where all the advertisements were. Finally, I found a company that would give me credit to buy a milling machine and a lathe, to cut steel. And, I didn't know how to use this machinery, and I ruined a lot of tools learning how to work it. And I started making these little knives. And I would take them to gun shows and sell them for like $85, $90, $100, which was really cool. Somebody to pay me that much for something that I made. And as time went on, I started getting better at it. And then people were paying me $200 for a knife, and $500 for a knife, and $1,000 for a knife, and $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000. In my wildest dreams, I never thought that making knives would be so much fun. And that's what I have a lot of fun making these knives. In my wildest dreams, I never thought that I would go around the world making knives. People around the world would buy my knives. It's been the greatest adventure that I have ventured into in all my life. And that's the end of it. Bye.
To ask you a question. Frank, why knives? Why it's not...
Why knives?
Yeah, why not the car or guitar?
Well,
why knives?
That's a good question to ask.
I'm not showing you eyes right now. But why eyes and knives rhymes?
Well,
your eyes is not shy.
I started making knives. I never knew about that there was a knife world out there, that there were collectors to buy knives, and I never knew that a knife world existed. But there's a knife world out there.
So, but why knife? It's not fork. It's not spoon.
Well,
You could make some spoons. But why knife? It's something inside you?
well, when I was a little boy, I went fishing one day, and on the rock where I was sitting, there was a knife somebody left behind because they were cutting bait with this knife. And it was a switchblade knife. And when you closed the blade and you pushed the button,
yeah,
the knife would open, and I said, this is really cool. I was probably 9 years old. And
it's a tool.
From that day forward, it intrigued me that, you know, these knives are really, really cool knives.
It's very functional
It
tool.
took one hand to open it, one hand to close it, and it was just a cool thing, you know, to have a switchblade.
Yeah.
Not to cut anybody with, God forbid, but just to have it.
And what kind of shapes of knives you create? Just like, I know that sometimes it's going to be woman, sometimes it's going to be animal, sometimes it's going to be tree, sometimes it's going to be roots of the tree and mountains, and sometimes it's going to be extremely abstract. Isn't right?
Let me tell you a story. One time I was cleaning my pool, and while I was cleaning the pool, a thought came into my mind to build a knife that looked like a Stradivarius violin. And I said, that's the next knife I'm going to build, a Stradivarius violin knife. And I started thinking about Michelangelo and all those cool guys that lived back in the 15th century. And they were incredible craftsmen, they were incredible artists. They created so much beauty, but all they had was a candlelight to work by. And a lot of them worked at night, and a lot of them loved their wine, and they liked their spirit, and they liked mind-altering substances, and they were like way ahead of their time, and they all hung around together, and they all knew each other. So I said, I wonder what it would be like to carve a Stradivarius violin at candlelight. And it was in the middle of August, warm summer night, and I sat out by the pool, and I lit a candle, and I started to carve a Stradivarius violin. And it was so incredible, because I saw so much, rather than use a 100-watt light bulb. And it was so enjoyable to sit there and carve this violin. And needless to say, I carved 8 of them before I carved one that was really, really good. And I put that Stradivarius violin into a handle of a knife, and I called that knife the Stradivarius. And maybe someday that Stradivarius violin will go down as a true collector's piece. And, you know, when I make a knife, I like to have a theme. And every once in a while, a theme will come into my mind, and I made a knife that looked like a Blue Marlin one, and I call it the Blue Marlin. And it's so nice to dub a knife, to give a knife a name, because that name will stay with that knife long after I'm gone. Ask me another question. If I had $3 million, I would go to the Newport Hospital and have them break this hand. And then I would have them reset it so it looks like this.
That's very clever. That's international science, definitely.